Who's actually going to get the most out of a 5-camera 4K outdoor kit, and who should just keep scrolling? If you're looking at a handful of bullet-style cams for a home yard, a small business storefront, or maybe a hobbyist garage studio, you're probably wondering whether the Unifi Protect 4K G4 Pro bundle will give you clear, reliable footage without turning your setup into a tech headache. And for the everyday buyer who isn't a seasoned network camera nerd, is the price justified? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into this category, the big question that kept popping up in forums and Q&A sections was, do I need 4K? A lot of people say yeah, it sounds impressive, but then they run into the reality that you need a solid network, plenty of storage, and a bit of bandwidth to actually make that resolution useful. That's where the Unifi bundle can feel like a double-edged sword. It promises ultra-high definition across 5 outdoor-rated bullets. But if your router can't handle the stream or you don't have a NAS ready to archive the data, you might end up watching a blurry mess or filling up your drive faster than you'd like. The first thing I looked at was how the cameras actually behave once you mount them. Unifi's G4 Pro lenses are fixed focus, not autofocus, which means you set the focus distance when you install them and you're basically done. For most yards or storefronts that are static, that's a plus. You won't have the motor humming or hunting for focus in the middle of the night. However, if you're trying to capture a wide-angle view that includes both near and far subjects, you'll have to pick a compromise focus point. In practice, I found that setting the focus a bit longer than you expect works reasonably well, but you do lose some crispness on close-up details like license plates. The lack of autofocus is a trade-off that keeps the cameras quieter and simpler, which is a win for beginners who don't want a constantly moving lens to troubleshoot. Low-light performance is where many 4K bullet cams stumble, and the G4 Pro is no different. The sensor does have a decent amount of infrared illumination, but the 4K resolution spreads those photons thin, so the image can get a bit grainy after dark. In real-world testing around my own driveway, the night view was clear enough to see a person's silhouette, but facial details were fuzzy unless you added an external IR illuminator. If you live in a well-lit suburb or your business has perimeter lighting, the built-in IR will likely be sufficient. If you're counting on the cameras alone to monitor a dark alley, you might need supplemental lighting or consider a lower resolution cam with larger pixels that handle darkness better. Stabilization isn't really a factor for stationary bullet cameras, but the G4 Pro does have some digital noise reduction that smooths out windshake if you mount them on a pole that flexes. In my experience, the effect is subtle. You won't notice it unless you're looking at a tree moving in the wind. That said, the cameras lack any kind of motion blur mitigation, so fast-moving objects can appear smeared. For a grocery store entrance or a driveway where cars zip by, you'll still get a decent frame, but don't expect razor-sharp motion capture. The Unifi Protect ecosystem is built around the Unifi Protect software, which is a web-based interface you run on a cloud key or a dedicated NVR. If you've already got a Unifi network, that integration feels seamless. The cameras appear automatically, you can assign them to VLANs, and the UI gives you live view, playback, and basic motion zones without extra licensing fees. The downside? The software isn't exactly plug-and-play for absolute beginners. You'll need to create a Unifi account, set up the Protect NVR, and go through a few menus before you're actually watching footage. Once you get past the initial setup, the experience is smooth, but the learning curve can be intimidating for someone who only ever used a simple Wi-Fi camera with a mobile app. Battery confidence isn't relevant here, these units are hardwired PoE. That said, PoE simplifies power logistics, and the fact that each camera draws a modest amount of power means you can daisy-chain them from a single 24-port PoE switch without breaking the bank. For anyone who'd rather avoid pulling separate AC lines, that's a practical win. On the flip side, if you're in a location without existing Ethernet cabling, you'll need to run new Cat6 or higher cable to each mount point, which adds labor and cost. So, who should consider buying this 5-camera kit? If you already have a Unifi network, are comfortable navigating a web-based NVR, and need reliable 4K coverage for a medium-sized property, think a suburban home with a front yard, back garden, and a 2-car garage. This bundle makes sense. The 4K resolution can be handy for zooming in on license plates or identifying a face from a few meters away, provided your lighting is decent. For small business owners who want